So, hey, I hope you're good. So, I want to talk about red flags. We all have them. No one is exempt from red flags. And usually, red flags come out in conflict. So, when you're meeting people, you're not oftentimes exhibiting your red flags unless you're like a child. Children are always just themselves and their red flags, their flaws, they show. And once you start being rebuked for that, that's when your shadow begins to form, because what happens is that you take those red flags and you just put them in your shadow, meaning you become unconscious of them. And the conscious aspects of yourself then form your ego, and that becomes who you are. So then you walk around thinking that you don't have any red flags because you conform to the standards of who you were taught to be, which is good. That's a good thing for the most part. But the truth is, you are also your red flags, you are also your shadow. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, what is a red flag? Anything can be a red flag. A red flag is anything that you perceive to be harmful to yourself or to others. So, someone can be extremely kind and sweet, and that's a red flag because sometimes that person is just a walkover. They are kind to the wrong people because not everybody deserves your kindness. And a red flag is not knowing that. A red flag can be a temper. Someone can have a very serious temper problem, and that makes them violent both verbally and physically. That's a red flag. A red flag can be your laziness. A red flag can be attitudes and mindsets that you have. So you are secretly racist. That's a red flag. You're secretly sexist. That's a red flag. You hold bigoted views about other people. Anything can be a red flag. What a red flag is not is an excuse not to love you. So someone who sees your red flags and uses them as an excuse not to love you is not someone who loves you, because someone who loves you with your red flags. But you're never going to know that until you start loving yourself with your red flags, because that's when you'll start to really know what true love is. Because it's only when you start to love and integrate your shadow that you really know true love. Because loving those parts of yourself is loving yourself. Then you'll realize that there have been people who have been experiencing your shadow your whole life and they've loved you as you anyway. Then you feel the love of those people because that love is true. You've been thinking that they love you because you show up as who you think they expect you to be, but your shadow always shows. You are just not conscious of your shadow. It doesn't mean that other people aren't, because most people experience your shadow. You are just not conscious of it. So some people love you with your temper, with your attitude, with your arrogance, with all your stuff that you keep unconscious to your ego and not aware as you formulate your self image. But your red flags are still a part of you. So, how do you love your red flags? Well, the first thing is that you accept that as a person you have them. Red flags are not just for the extreme cases that we see in the news. Red flags are for you and me and everyone else in this world. So, when you decide that you are going to become aware of your red flags and then love that version of yourself, you'll feel confronted because it's very disarming for your ego to face the fact that you are not who you think you are, and that you are who you never thought you are. So you may have a strong judgment towards people who outwardly exhibit qualities that are in your shadow because you keep those qualities in check, but really you don't. You keep them repressed and out of your conscious awareness. Keeping it in check is becoming aware of it and then integrating it into parts of yourself. So if you have a temper tantrum, or if you are deeply repressed as a person and you are unexpressed, like as who you are, like you don't say your true thoughts, you don't think with your own mind, You just are someone who is dragged along by everyone else in society. You have a deep sense of repression as a person because you're afraid of people not liking you for what you think. And so you think what other people will like you as. When that sits in your shadow, that's a red flag because when you do say what you think, you say it in the most grotesque and uninhibited way because you are not very rehearsed in how to put forward your true views in a way that is not a slaughtering for other people. So, I'm a blunt person, for example. I've always been a blunt person. And whenever I encounter people who are very polite in their expression verbally, they are very triggered by me. And sometimes these people say the most outrageous things because they think that their uninhibited thoughts are the same thing as my blunt expression when it's not. I'm very well rehearsed in my blunt expression because it's a true aspect of who I am. When you are a polite person and you have this like grotesque expression of something that is like coming from your shadow and just expressing itself out of rage or being triggered, it can cause so much damage for you because your ego gets mortified by what you said. What you've said puts your character in question. It's not really about offending or hurting people. It's about the fact that it taints how you come across to people. So you were polite and that's how people knew you, and now you say something that is so left and no one expected that from you. And now people are questioning your identity because they don't know who you are anymore. That's the danger of having those parts of you repressed and uninhibited. And you may have been responding to someone as blunt as me, whereas I'm used to people not liking me. I'm comfortable with that. It doesn't phase me as much as it would someone who is polite because they're polite for people to like them. Different to someone who's polite from a place of conviction. That person may also be comfortable with people not liking them because they're not polite to be liked. They're polite from a place of conviction. There's truth in their politeness. So, in this example, my bluntness doesn't disintegrate my ego. And it's also not an expression of my shadow. It's actually my light. It's who I am. It's my conscious self. It's my conscious expression. It's just my personality. This is the way that I am. But this offends some people because they've become so used to tucking themselves in that when someone is not tucked in this aspect of themselves, they are very offended by that because they don't want to tuck themselves in. They want to be blunt. They want to express themselves. They want to be rude, even. Blunt isn't the same as rude, it's just unfiltered. And when you are tucked in and extremely filtered and extremely careful, but in your shadow lives an unadulterated expression of something raw and unedited, that threatens your ego. Whether or not people respond well or poorly to you, your own ego can be very mortified by your expression because you don't know how to operate in a world where people really know what you think. You only know how to operate in a world where people think that you are a nice person, or in a world where you think people like you because of how you show up. So the red flag means accepting your grotesque expression and integrating that, not by being rude or blunt if that's not who you are, but by accepting that in your shadow is a rude, blunt, inappropriate, uninhibited person who has a very grotesque expression, and then loving that self. Maybe write all your secret thoughts in a journal so that that self gets to express themselves somewhere, so that when you are triggered, you're not triggered in such a way that that comes out of your shadow and becomes a red flag when it doesn't need to be. It can be a part of you that you accept by facing and becoming more whole and more integrated in that version of yourself. So being comfortable with the fact that you do have uninhibited, unexpressed aspects of you that sit in your shadow that are highly triggered by people who are very uninhibited and very expressed in their light and in their conscious expression. But instead of then betraying your own ego and letting your shadow destroy you in that way, you become aware of it, and then you find avenues and channels to express it. As I said, journaling is an example, talking to someone in therapy is an example, getting shadow work coaching for this aspect of yourself is another example. In fact, that's the best time to get shadow work coaching, is when you start to become aware of an aspect of your shadow that you need help integrating. Then someone can help coach you into integrating that aspect of yourself. But integrating your red flags first needs you to become aware of them, and then find an avenue for you to express those flags in a way that doesn't mortify your ego, in a way that doesn't betray yourself. Then making that conscious is then finding a way to accept that as a part of you without destroying the self that you've created to show up as in this world.